As many as 70% of US adults have experienced some type of traumatic event at least once in their lives. And let me be clear, trauma does not have to begin with a capital T. The small, subtle traumas add up too. In this part 1 video, to help you cope with trauma and the many ways that it manifests, yes, even into late adulthood, I'll explain 4 big effects of trauma to encourage you to do the brave work and heal, because it is worth it. In case you're new, I'm Cyn Meyer, the founder of Second Wind Movement and a life coach for older adults who are striving to turn their retirement years into their best years full of purpose and meaning. And a big part of that is establishing a healthy foundation, both physically and mentally, and of course, getting to the root issues so that you can excavate any blocks from your ideal retirement life. And I see this all the time. You wouldn't think so because so much time has passed, but trauma plays out in older adulthood. To be super clear, let's first define what trauma is. Generally speaking, trauma is defined as an experience so distressing that it overwhelms your ability to cope or process the event. It can be caused by a single traumatic event like a car accident or several experiences over a long period with difficult situations, like living with abuse or neglect. There are 3 main types of trauma: acute trauma from a single incident, chronic trauma, repeated prolonged events, complex trauma from varied multiple incidents. And everyone experiences and processes trauma differently. What may be traumatic for one person may not be for another, and the impact of trauma can also manifest in a number of ways, whether it's anxiety, depression, or PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Either way, the common denominator is that the coping mechanisms picked up from the traumatic event or events are less than ideal in the aftermath, especially in later adulthood. It's stored in your body for so long, and after years of conditioning and using the same coping mechanisms, it's especially important to heal traumatic wounds, to make some much needed shifts in retirement so that you can adopt healthier, more effective coping mechanisms when stress arises. As for the most common effects of trauma, there's number 1, the emotional effects of trauma. Trauma can literally mess with the way that your brain regulates emotions and handles stress. And when it comes to childhood trauma, which yes, still affects older adults, as Dr. Adrienne Heinz, trauma and addiction research scientist at Stanford University put it, when you're a little one, you don't get the choice to process what you're going through. Your brain adapts to survive. So it's not uncommon to feel a mix of fear and sadness, anger, guilt, and shame all at once, and to not know exactly where it's coming from in that moment when triggered in later life from something totally unrelated, because your body remembers and reacts. Which brings us to number 2, physical effects. It's crazy to think that something that happens to you mentally can have such powerful effects on your body. It's just further proof of how connected your mind and body really are. Not only does your nervous system physically react to current triggers in the same way that it did way back during the initial time of trauma, but eventually, trauma can cause disrupted sleep patterns, fatigue, headaches, digestive problems, chronic pain, and even weakened immunity. Studies show that trauma can increase your risk of developing chronic physical conditions like heart disease, obesity, and hypertension. So it's super important to address the root issue. Number 3, cognitive effects. Dealing with the cognitive effects of trauma is no walk in the park. You might feel like you're living in a perpetual loop. Sometimes it's the same repeat emotions, sometimes it looks like brain fog, unable to focus or remember things like you used to, which makes sense because studies show that older adults who experience trauma as kids tend to have lower processing speed, attention, and executive functioning skills. This makes resolving childhood trauma even more critical, no matter your age. Because, and I see this often, decision fatigue sets in. Even simple decisions might feel like a monumental task which can leave you feeling overwhelmed and frustrated. These effects can be especially tough to cope with because they're internal. Other people might not fully understand what's going on the inside. They can't see it. And number 4, behavioral effects. This is where coping mechanisms come into play. For instance, in post-trauma behavior, you might find yourself pulling away from social situations and avoiding people and places that trigger negative memories. And if that's not enough, you may also notice yourself engaging in some pretty self-destructive behaviors just to avoid recreating the original traumatic pain. While it may be unproductive and a bit ironic to replace traumatic pain with an unhealthy behavior, it makes sense in the context of a coping mechanism where you try to numb or avoid the pain from trauma. So from gambling to substance abuse or just numbing out in front of the screen, the behavioral effects of trauma can lead you down some pretty avoidant paths in current day life. It just goes to show how much power trauma can hold over you if it's unhealed. Remember, if any of this resonates with you, you're not alone. You're in good company. Trauma happens to all of us, whether with a capital T or a lowercase t, and it has a cumulative effect because you just go on with your life with coping mechanisms and conditioning from the past that can very easily leave this stuff from decades ago unhealed. And that really prevents you from living your best life. There is a way out, and we dig into practical steps in our part 2 video. For now, our recap of the 4 big effects of trauma: emotional effects, physical effects, your body keeps the score, it remembers the exact coping mechanism that more than likely no longer serves you. Cognitive effects, the emotional and physical effects take their compounding toll. And behavioral effects, whether consciously or subconsciously. So head to our part 2 video on 5 coping mechanisms for trauma. Thank you so much for being here and for striving to be your best during retirement. We need more people like you to help shift our culture to be better. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment on this video. Every engagement that you make with our videos helps us do our job better of creating helpful content for this important audience of older adults. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.